It's me! Who are you looking at?
Imagine this. You're standing in front of your bathroom mirror, going through the motions of your daily routine. You look up, and for a split second, the person staring back at you isn't you. The expression is wrong. There's a flicker of malice. In the eyes, a subtle twist of the lips that you didn't make. Today, we are going to share 3 true, deeply unsettling stories from people who looked in the mirror and saw the wrong. Reflection. The mirror is supposed to be our most honest critic. A perfect, unvarnished reflection of who we are. The deepest, most primal fear isn't that a monster is hiding in the closet. It's the terror of not recognizing the face you've known your entire life. That it's the ultimate violation of identity. A psychological schism that makes you question your own sanity. Am I seeing things? Or is the person in the mirror someone else? But what if these aren't just tricks of the light? What if they are glimpses into a fractured reality? By exploring these real accounts, from a reflection that showed a scarred and hateful future, to a dark figure that appeared where no one should be, we will confront the chilling possibility that our own reflections have a life of their own. These stories are a disturbing look into the abyss of the uncanny valley, and they will change the way you look at yourself forever. Now, before we face our own reflections, make sure you are subscribed to Whispered Fear and have activated the bell. You don't want to be the only one who doesn't recognize the person staring back.
Look what you become.
Our first story is about the ghosts of the future. It's about the terrifying possibility that the person you are most afraid of becoming is already looking back at you from the other side of the mirror. It comes from a young man named Ethan, who, in the crucible of his own ambition, was forced to confront a reflection that was not a memory of the past, but a horrifying promise of what was to come. At 26, Ethan's entire world was a stack of books and a mountain of anxiety. He was living in a small, third-floor walk-up apartment in Chicago's Lincoln Park neighborhood, a place he could barely afford. For the past 3 years, his life had been a grueling, caffeine-fueled marathon through the UIC School of Law. Now, he was in the final brutal sprint, studying for the Illinois bar exam. The exam was not just a test. It was a monolith that stood between him and his entire future. It was the gatekeeper to a job at a prestigious firm, a way to finally pay off his 6-figure student loan debt, and, most importantly, a way to finally justify the immense sacrifices his parents had made to get him here. The pressure was a physical weight, a constant, low-grade hum of terror in the back of his mind. His apartment on North Clark Street was his bunker. The world outside, with its laughing couples and the cheerful sounds of the nearby Lincoln Park Zoo, felt a million miles away. His world was the amber glow of his desk lamp, the scent of old paper and stale coffee, and the endless, looping cycle of flashcards and practice exams. He was isolated, exhausted, and running on fumes. His only real human contact was the nightly, guilt-ridden phone call to his fiancée, Maya, who was patiently waiting for him to finish this final trial so their real life could begin. He was losing weight. His sleep was a shallow, dreamless state of near consciousness. He was, in every sense of the word, breaking. The mirror in his small, cramped bathroom became an unwilling witness to his slow decay. It was a simple, cheap, frameless mirror, glued to the wall above a pedestal sink. Every morning, he would stand before it, the harsh fluorescent light of the vanity exposing the dark circles under his eyes, the new lines of stress around his mouth. He would look at his own tired 26-year-old face and see the ghost of the successful, confident man he was supposed to become. It was a ritual of quiet, desperate hope. The first glitch was subtle. So subtle he was certain he had imagined it. It was a Tuesday morning, after an all-night study session fueled by 3 energy drinks. He was standing at the sink, splashing cold water on his face. He looked up, his eyes bleary, and for a split second, a single impossible frame of reality, the face in the mirror was not his own. It was the face of an older man, maybe in his late 50s. The face was gaunt, the skin sallow and etched with deep, bitter lines. There was a thin, white scar that cut through his left eyebrow, but it was the eyes that made Ethan's heart stop. They were his eyes, the same shade of blue, but they were filled with a cold, dead, and utterly soul-crushing hatred. It was a look of pure, undiluted self-loathing. He blinked, and the face was gone. His own young, terrified face stared back at him. He stood there for a long moment, water dripping from his chin onto the worn linoleum floor, his heart hammering against his ribs. Had been a hallucination, a hypnagogic jerk of the optic nerve. A phantom created by exhaustion and caffeine. It was the only logical explanation. He clung to it like a life raft. He had to. The alternative was unthinkable. He tried to push the incident from his mind, burying it under layers of legal jargon and case law. But the image of the older man's face, of those hateful eyes, was a crack in the foundation of his sanity. And over the next few weeks, the crack began to spread. He started seeing the man on the street. The first time was on a study break. He was walking down to the Starbucks on Northalsted Street, his mind a numb fog of legal theory. He was waiting at a crosswalk when he saw him, standing on the opposite corner. The same older man, the same gaunt face, the same bitter lines. And, even from a distance, he could see the thin, white scar through his left eyebrow. The man was just standing there, his hands shoved into the pockets of a worn, shabby coat, and he was staring directly at Ethan. The hatred in his eyes was a physical thing, a force that seemed to cross the street and press against him. The light changed, and the man turned and disappeared into the crowd. Ethan stood frozen on the corner, his coffee forgotten, his body trembling. Coincidence. It had to be a coincidence. Chicago was a city of 8 million people. There were bound to be doppelgangers. But the feeling was too specific. It was the same cold dread he had felt looking in the mirror. He saw him again a few days later, sitting on a bench in the park, watching him as he walked by. He saw him through the window of a passing Blue train. The man was a silent, persistent phantom, a ghost who had seemingly detached himself from the mirror and was now haunting the periphery of his real life. The paranoia began to take hold. Was he being followed? Or was he losing his mind? Was this man real? Or was he a projection of his own mounting stress? He didn't know which answer was more terrifying. The incidents with the mirror grew more frequent, more pronounced. The flicker of the older man's face would last a second longer each time. It was like a slow-motion transformation, a horrifying preview of a future he was desperately trying to avoid. He started to dread the simple act of washing his hands, of brushing his teeth. His own reflection had become a source of profound terror. He tried to talk to Maya about it, but the words felt insane as he said them. I think I'm seeing someone. An older man. He looks a little like me, and I see him in the mirror sometimes. She was loving and concerned. She blamed the stress of the bar exam. You're not sleeping. Ethan, you're pushing yourself too hard. It's just your mind playing tricks on you. He wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her, but the image of those hateful eyes, the certainty that he was being watched, was a truth that her logic could not erase. The climax arrived on a Sunday, just 3 days before the exam. He had been studying for 16 straight hours. His mind was a raw, frayed nerve. The words on the page had begun to blur, to lose their meaning. He felt like he was on the verge of a complete and total breakdown. He decided he needed to get out, to walk, to breathe air that wasn't thick with the smell of old books and his own quiet desperation. He walked through the quiet, tree-lined streets of Lincoln Park, the cool night air a welcome shock to his system. He found himself walking towards the Lincoln Park Conservatory, its massive glass domes glowing like alien biodomes against the dark night sky. He walked around the back to the Alfred Caldwell Lily Pool, a place he and Maya had visited on one of their first dates. It was a hidden sanctuary, a secret garden in the heart of the city. The pool was closed for the night, the gates locked. He stood there, looking through the iron bars at the dark, still water, the moonlight reflecting on its surface. And he saw him. The old man was sitting on a stone bench on the other side of the pool. He was not a reflection. He was not a peripheral glimpse. He was real, solid, and he was looking right at Ethan. In the clear, cool moonlight, Ethan could see every detail of his face. The sallow, wrinkled skin, the patchy, gray stubble, the thin, bitter line of his mouth, and the scar, a pale, silver slash through his left eyebrow. But there was something new, a fresh wound, a dark, ugly, purplish bruise that was forming around his right eye, a classic sign of a bar fight. And on his chin, there was a small, bloody cut. The man didn't move. He just sat there, his hateful, tired eyes locked on Ethan's. It was a silent, final confrontation. Ethan didn't run. He was too tired to run. He just stood there, his fingers gripping the cold iron of the gate, and stared back at the ghost of his own failed future. This was it. This was the end of the line. The man he was destined to become if he failed, if he broke, if he gave up. After a long, silent moment, the old man slowly, deliberately, stood up. He turned and limped away into the darkness of the gardens, disappearing behind a stand of weeping willows. Ethan stood there for another hour, the cold of the iron gate seeping into his bones. He was broken. The bar exam, his future, his life, it all felt meaningless in the face of that profound, soul-crushing hatred he had seen in his own eyes. He finally stumbled home, his mind a numb, silent void. He walked into his apartment. He didn't turn on the lights. He walked straight to the bathroom. He had to see. He had to know. He stood in the darkness, in front of the mirror. He took a deep, shuddering breath and flicked on the vanity light. His own young, terrified face stared back at him. There was no scar. There was no bruise. There were no bitter lines. It was just him. He let out a sob of pure, unadulterated relief, his body slumping against the sink. It was over. The stress had finally pushed him over the edge, and he had come back. It had all been a hallucination, a powerful, persistent, and terrifyingly detailed hallucination. The man wasn't real. He was just a monster created by his own fear. He felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. The fear was gone, replaced by a profound, exhausted clarity. He knew he needed help. He would call Maya. He would call his parents. He would withdraw from the bar exam and focus on getting well. He would be okay. He looked at his reflection one last time, a real, genuine smile touching his lips for the first time in months. And in that moment of final, peaceful clarity, his reflection did something impossible. It raised its hand to its face, and with a slow, deliberate movement, it began to peel. The skin of its right cheek lifted, revealing not muscle and bone, but the dark, hollow void of a cheap latex mask. The reflection's other hand reached up and peeled away the rest of the mask, revealing the face underneath. It was the face of the old man, gaunt, scarred, and filled with a cold, triumphant hatred. The man in the mirror, the real man, the one who had been trapped behind the mask of his own younger self, looked out at him with a chilling, final familiarity. And he spoke. His voice was not a sound in the room. It was a thought, a cold, clear, and venomous thought that bloomed directly in the center of Ethan's mind. "I told you I'd be back," the voice said. "Now it's my turn." Ethan stumbled back. a scream finally tearing from his throat. He spun around, away from the mirror, and his eyes caught on his own reflection in the dark glass of the shower door. And he saw it, his own face. His young, terrified, 26-year-old face. But it was looking back at him with the cold, dead, hateful eyes of the older man. The final horrifying truth was not that a ghost had been haunting him. The truth was that he was the ghost. He was the young, hopeful reflection, a memory of a past that was no longer real. And the man, the real man, the bitter, broken, hateful man who had been living inside him all along, had finally, after a long and patient wait, broken through the mirror and taken his place. The man on the street, the man in the park, the man in the mirror. He hadn't been a premonition of a failed future. He had been the reality of a forgotten past, a past that had just reclaimed its host. The next morning, the police found him wandering, disoriented, in Lincoln Park. Couldn't remember his own name. He couldn't remember where he lived. The only thing he could tell them, over and over in a hoarse, broken whisper, was a single, terrified warning. Don't look in the mirror. He's trying to get out.
Turn around. Turn around.
Our second story is about the terrifying fragility of solitude. It's about the silent, implicit trust we place in the walls of our own homes. The belief that what we see is all that is there. It comes from a woman named Anna, a graphic designer, who moved to a new city to start a new life. She learned that a reflection can show you more than just your own face. It can show you the things that are standing silently in the room with you, the things that have been there all along, patiently, waiting in the one place you never thought to look, right behind you. At 28, Anna's life was a blank canvas. After a painful breakup that had consumed most of her early 20s, she had made the terrifying and exhilarating decision to leave her life in rural Pennsylvania behind. She packed her car with her art supplies, her portfolio, and a desperate, fragile hope, and drove to Philadelphia. The city was a shock to her system, loud, chaotic, and relentlessly alive. It was exactly what she needed. She landed a promising junior designer position at a small, prestigious branding agency, O3 World, located in the trendy Fishtown neighborhood. Her life was finally, for the first time, entirely her own. Her future was a blank page, and she was the one holding the pen. Her first apartment was a small, third-floor unit in a historic pre-war building in the Washington Square West neighborhood, a place locals affectionately called Wash West. The building on Pine Street was beautiful, a classic brick structure with ornate iron fire escapes and a grand, if slightly decaying, lobby. Her apartment was small, but it had character. High ceilings, original hardwood floors that groaned with the weight of a century of secrets, and a large, beautiful bay window that overlooked the street. It was more than she could really afford, a constant source of low-grade financial anxiety. But it was her sanctuary. The one place in a city of millions where she could be completely, utterly alone. The bathroom was the one room she hadn't gotten around to renovating. It was a time capsule from the 1950s, with Pepto-Bismol pink tiles and an old, heavy cast-iron tub. The centerpiece was a large, simple, frameless mirror that had been glued to the wall above the sink, likely a cheap replacement from a long-ago decade. The silvering at the edges was starting to decay, creating a dark, creeping border that seemed to be slowly encroaching on the clear glass. It was a flawed, imperfect mirror, but it served its purpose. Anna's life quickly settled into a rhythm. Long, demanding hours at the agency, followed by quiet, solitary evenings in her apartment. She would come home, exhausted but creatively fulfilled, make a simple dinner, and spend hours sketching in her notepad, the sounds of the city a distant, comforting lullaby. She was happy. She was independent. She was safe. The first crack in her carefully constructed fortress of solitude was small. So small she almost didn't notice it. It was a Tuesday night. She was at the sink, going through her nightly routine, washing her face. She had her eyes closed, her hands lathered with soap, the warm water a comforting sensation. She rinsed, and as she straightened up, she opened her eyes to look at her own dripping, soap-smudged face in the mirror. And for a split second, she saw it in the reflection in the dark, empty doorway of the bathroom, which was visible just over her shoulder in the mirror. A shadow had moved, a quick vertical flicker of darkness, like a person passing by the doorway in the hallway. She spun around, her heart giving a single hard thump. The doorway was empty. The hallway beyond was dark and still. She stood there for a full minute, listening. She heard nothing but the familiar hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen and the distant wail of a siren. She told herself instantly, it's the cat from next door. Her neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, had a large, black cat that would sometimes slip into the hallway. It was a logical, comforting explanation. It had to be. She took a deep breath, the adrenaline slowly receding, and turned back to the mirror, forcing the image from her mind. A week later, it happened again, the exact same scenario. She was washing her face, eyes closed. When she opened them and looked in the mirror, she saw it again. The same flicker of a tall, dark shadow passing by the open doorway behind her. This time, she didn't spin around. She stayed perfectly still, her eyes locked on the reflection of the empty doorway in the mirror. She waited, her breath held, for what felt like an eternity. Nothing. She rationalized, her own reflection looking pale and frightened. It's a trick of the light. A car's headlights moving across the living room window, casting a moving shadow. It was another plausible explanation. Her apartment building was old. The science of light and shadow was a complex and sometimes deceptive thing. She was a designer. She understood this. But a new, quiet ritual was born from this unease. She started closing the bathroom door when she washed her face at night. A small, seemingly insignificant change in her routine. But it was a concession, an admission that some small logical part of her was afraid of what her own reflection might show her. The feeling of being watched began to grow, a slow, creeping vine of paranoia. She would be sitting at her drafting table, deep in concentration, and get a sudden prickling sensation on the back of her neck. She would turn, and the apartment would be empty, silent, but the feeling would linger, a cold spot in the air, a sense of a recently departed, but not quite gone, presence. She started to feel like she was not alone in her sanctuary. The silence of the apartment, once a comfort, now felt heavy, watchful. She started leaving the radio on, a constant stream of music and chatter to fill the quiet spaces, to keep the silence at bay. Her friends noticed the change. Her best friend, Chloe, had sat over coffee at a La Colombe on South 19th Street. "You seem jumpy, Anna. Everything okay?" Anna had just waved it off, a brittle smile on her face. "Just work stress. You know how it is." She couldn't tell her the truth. She couldn't admit that she was afraid of her own empty apartment. She knew she needed to debunk her own growing fear. The human mind is a powerful and often unreliable thing. She was living alone for the first time in a new city. She was under a lot of pressure at her new job. The most logical explanation was that her own mind was creating a phantom to populate her loneliness. She decided to prove it. She set up a camera. It was the same small, white Wisecam she used to monitor her cat when she went away for the weekend. She placed it on top of the tall bookshelf in her living room, its wide-angle lens covering the main living area and the hallway that led to the bathroom and bedroom. If a shadow was being cast by a passing car, the camera would see it. If the neighbor's cat was somehow getting in, the camera would see it. If she was, in fact, going insane, the camera would prove That too, by showing her an empty, unhaunted apartment. It was an objective, logical witness. For a week, the camera recorded nothing but the quiet, mundane reality of her life. She would scrub through the footage each morning, a strange voyeur of her own solitude. She saw herself making dinner, sketching, watching TV. She saw the empty, silent apartment while she slept. There were no shadows, no flickers of movement, no intruders. The logical part of her was relieved. The paranoid part was terrified. If it wasn't on the camera, then the problem wasn't in the apartment. The problem was inside her head. The climax, the moment that would shatter her carefully constructed reality, came on a rainy Thursday night. She had come home from work late, soaked to the bone from an unexpected downpour. She felt a cold coming on, her head stuffy, her body aching. All she wanted was a hot shower, a cup of tea, and the mindless comfort of her bed. She went into the bathroom, closing the door behind her, a habit she now performed without thinking. She turned on the shower, the small room quickly filling with a thick, comforting steam. After a long, hot shower, she felt a little more human. She stepped out, wrapped a towel around herself, and wiped a clear circle in the center of the fogged-up mirror to look at her own face. Her reflection stared back, her face flushed from the heat, her hair a mess of wet tangles. The steam swirled around the edges of the clear circle she had made, and it was in that swirling, shifting fog on the mirror's surface, just over her own reflected shoulder, that she saw it. It wasn't a fleeting glimpse. It wasn't a peripheral flicker. It was a clear, undeniable, and utterly impossible image. Standing directly behind her, in the small, steamy, and locked bathroom, was the silhouette of a tall, dark figure. It was a man. He was unnaturally tall, his head almost touching the ceiling. He was thin, his form a sharp, angular cutout against the white steam. He was wearing what looked like a long, dark coat, and he was perfectly, unnaturally still. She couldn't see his face. It was a blur, a smudge of deeper darkness in the steam, but she could feel his gaze from the reflection, a cold, dead, and patient stare. Time seemed to stop. The only sound was the frantic, silent scream in her own mind. This was not a trick of the light. This was not a shadow from the hallway. The door was closed. The door was locked. She was in the room with it. Her mind, in a desperate, last-ditch effort at self-preservation, supplied a final, insane, logical explanation. She thought the words a frantic, looping mantra in her head. It's the steam. The condensation on the mirror is creating a pattern. A trick of PAREIDOL IA. It's not real. It's just steam. She had to prove it. She had to break the illusion. With a trembling, robotic movement, she raised her hand and wiped the rest of the steam from the mirror's surface, her eyes locked on the reflection, on the dark, silent figure that stood behind her. She wiped away the fog, revealing the clean, pink tiles of the wall behind her. But the figure didn't disappear with the steam. It remained, a solid, dark, and impossible presence. In the now clear reflection of her empty bathroom, the last of her denial shattered. A raw, guttural sound of pure terror tore from her throat. She spun around, a scream building, ready to confront the man who was standing an arm's length behind her. And there was nothing. The bathroom was empty. The space where the man had been standing was just empty space. The pink tiled wall was bare. The air was still, heavy with the scent of soap and steam. She was alone. She stood there for a long, silent moment, her mind a complete and total blank. And then she looked back at the mirror. In the reflection, the man was still there. He hadn't moved, and he was looking right at her. The geography of her reality fell apart. The monster wasn't in the room with her. The monster was in the reflection. Or rather, the reflection was the only thing that could see the monster that was really in the room with her. She didn't wait for another revelation. She fled, She didn't grab a towel, didn't grab her clothes. She ran out of the bathroom, out of the apartment, and down the hallway of the 3rd floor, a screaming, half-naked ghost in her own building. She pounded on her neighbor's door, Mrs. Gable's door, until the old woman opened it, her face a mask of shock and concern. The police were called. They searched her apartment. They found nothing. Not a sign of a break-in. No sign of an intruder. The only thing they found was her camera, still sitting on the bookshelf in the living room. The footage was the final, terrifying piece of the puzzle. They played it back. It showed her coming home from work. It showed her entering the bathroom. And then, for the next 20 minutes, it showed the empty, silent living room. But it wasn't empty. At the 15-minute mark, a floorboard in the corner of the living room, a corner that was usually hidden by a large, heavy armchair, slowly, silently lifted up. It was a hidden trapdoor, perfectly integrated into the old hardwood floor. And from the dark opening, a man emerged. He was tall, thin, and moved with a silent, practiced grace. He was the maintenance man for the building, a quiet, unassuming man named Arthur, a man she had seen a dozen times in the hallways, a man who had a master key to every apartment. The footage showed him walking silently to the bathroom door. He didn't try to open it. He just stood there, listening. Then he knelt down and peered through the old, oversized, skeleton keyhole in the center of the door. He stayed like that for minutes, a silent, patient voyeur. He was the shadow she had seen in the hallway. He was the presence she had felt in the apartment. The footage then showed him hearing her scream. He stood up, a look of what seemed like panic on his face, and scrambled back to the trapdoor in the corner. He slipped back into the dark opening and pulled the floorboard shut behind him, disappearing without a trace. The police found the hidden space. It was a network of old, forgotten service passages that ran between the walls and under the floors of the entire building, a secret labyrinth known only to him. His nest was in a small, cramped space directly under her apartment, a place filled with his belongings and, most chillingly, with dozens of small, pinhole cameras he had installed throughout her home, their lenses peering out from electrical outlets, smoke detectors, and the back of her television. He hadn't been a ghost in her reflection. He had been a real, flesh and blood monster, a man who had become so obsessed with her, a complete stranger, that he had made her life his own. The reflection in the mirror hadn't been a hallucination. The mirror, with its perfect angle to the keyhole in the door, had been the only honest thing in the room. It was the only thing that had shown her the truth. It had shown her the man who was standing right behind her in the hallway, looking in. Arthur was caught a week later, hiding in the service passages beneath another building, in another neighborhood. But for Anna, the terror never left. She moved out of the apartment, out of the city. She lives now in a new, modern building with thin walls and no history. But she can never shake the feeling of being watched. She no longer trusts reflections. She will never again close her eyes when she washes her face, and she is left with a single, horrifying, and unshakable truth. The most terrifying monster is the one you never see. The one that's been standing right behind you all along. He was the presence she had felt in the apartment.
Is that what you really think?
Our final story is about the terrifying intimacy of self-doubt. It's about the silent, judgmental critic that lives in our own heads, the one that knows our deepest insecurities. But what if that critic wasn't just a voice in your head? What if it was the person staring back at you from the mirror? This story comes from a teenager named Kevin, who, while preparing for the most important speech of his life, discovered that his reflection was not a silent partner, but a saboteur, a judge, and a jury, and that it had already reached its own terrifying verdict. At 17, Kevin's entire future was balanced on a single, 10-minute speech. He was a senior at Palo Alto High School, a place where academic pressure was a form of currency, and the competition for college admissions was a blood sport. Kevin was a good student, but he wasn't a natural. He had to work twice as hard as his peers just to keep up. His one true passion was astrophysics. His dream was a scholarship to Stanford University, a dream that felt both impossibly close and a million miles away. The final step was a public speaking competition for the prestigious Hayes Scholarship, a full-ride award that would change the trajectory of his entire life. The topic, my place in the cosmos. It was a topic he loved, a topic he had spent months researching. But he had one crippling weakness, a paralyzing fear of public speaking. His life had shrunk to the four walls of his bedroom, in his family's modest ranch-style house on Ross Road. The room was his command center, the walls covered in astronomical charts and complex equations scrawled on whiteboards. His parents, loving but perpetually worried about the financial strain of college, tried to be supportive, but their anxious hope was a weight on his shoulders. He was their golden ticket, their one shot at the dream. The pressure was immense. His only real practice partner was his reflection. The mirror on his closet door became his silent, captive audience thought he would stand before it for hours, reciting his speech, his hands gesturing at the imaginary crowd. The mirror was honest. It showed him his sweaty palms, the nervous twitch at the corner of his eye, the way his shoulders hunched when he was unsure of a phrase. It was a tool for self-improvement, a silent critic he could control. The first time his reflection rebelled, it was almost funny. He was practicing a difficult section of his speech, a complex explanation of gravitational lensing. He stumbled over a word, frustrated. "Damn it," he muttered, shaking his head. In the mirror, his reflection shook its head too, but its expression was different. It wasn't frustration. It was a look of profound, almost pitying, disappointment. Kevin paused, a strange, cold feeling washing over him. It was a trick of the light, of his own self-critical mind projecting onto his reflection. He took a breath and started the line. Again, delivering it perfectly this time. His reflection mirrored him flawlessly. The incident was forgotten, a small, strange blip in his grueling practice schedule. But the blips became more frequent, more judgmental. A week later, he was practicing his opening, trying to inject more passion into his voice. As he spoke, he saw his reflection's eyes narrow in a subtle, critical squint. He faltered, lost his place. The reflection's expression didn't change. It just watched him, its silent critique hanging in the air. He started to feel a growing sense of unease. The mirror, his trusted tool, was turning on him. He tried to ignore it, to focus only on his own performance, but it was like trying to ignore a judge, staring at you from the bench. He found himself watching his reflection more than he was practicing, searching for its silent, subtle tells of disapproval. Was that a slight curl of the lip? A subtle roll of the eyes? His own self-doubt was being amplified and reflected back at him with a terrifying, objective clarity. He tried to explain it to his best friend Liam one afternoon while they were grabbing a coffee at Phil's Coffee on Forest Avenue. "I feel like I'm going crazy. Man," he'd said, "it's like my own reflection thinks my speech sucks." Liam had just laughed. "Dude, that's just you. You're your own worst critic. You're just projecting. You're gonna kill it." Liam's logical, well-meaning explanation made perfect sense, but it didn't change what Kevin was seeing. The reflection's descent became more overt. One evening, as Kevin was practicing his closing statement, a passionate appeal about the wonder of the cosmos, he watched, his blood turning to ice as his reflection slowly, deliberately yawned. It was a wide, bored, and utterly contemptuous yawn. But Kevin's own mouth was still delivering the passionate lines of his speech. His own mouth was still moving. The reflection's was not. He stopped, his voice dying in his throat. He stared at the mirror, his heart hammering. The reflection stared back, its face now a neutral, waiting mask. He was standing in his room alone, but he had never felt so intensely, so terrifyingly watched. The fear began to seep into his life outside the bedroom. He started avoiding his own reflection. He would turn away from shop windows on the street. He would use the bathroom in the dark. He couldn't shake the feeling that the judgmental critic from his closet mirror had been let loose, that it was now watching him from every reflective surface. The paranoia was crippling. His grades began to slip. His parents grew more concerned. The scholarship, his one bright hope for the future, now felt like a curse, the source of this strange internal haunting. The night before the competition was the breaking point. He knew he had to deliver the speech one last time, perfectly, without a single mistake. He had to conquer his fear. He had to conquer his own reflection. He stood before the closet mirror, the pages of his speech clutched in his sweaty hand, his own reflection looking back at him, pale and terrified. He whispered to himself, a desperate pep talk. "Okay, you can do this." He began the speech. His voice was shaky at first, but he found his rhythm. He spoke of supernovas and black holes, of the cosmic dance of galaxies. He poured every ounce of his passion, his knowledge, his soul into the words. He was not just reciting, he was performing. And, for the first time, his reflection seemed to be with him, its lips moving in perfect sync, its expression as passionate as his own. He was nearing the end, his confidence soaring. He had done it. He had beaten the ghost in the mirror. He delivered his final, powerful line. And in that vast, silent cosmos, our own small, questioning consciousness is the most wondrous phenomenon of all. He stood there, breathing heavily, a triumphant smile on his face dotting the mirror. His reflection smiled back, and then it stopped talking. Kevin was still speaking, a few final, ad-libbed words of thanks to his imaginary audience. But the reflection's mouth was closed-off. It just stood there, its triumphant smile slowly, horribly, fading, replaced by a look of cold, clinical, and utter disapproval. And then, it slowly, deliberately shook its head. A single, silent, and damning verdict. Kevin stared, his mind a complete and total blank. The world seemed to fall away, leaving only him and this silent, judgmental twin, who wore his face. And then, the reflection did something that shattered the last of his sanity. It reached into the pocket of its reflected trousers, a pocket Kevin knew was empty, and pulled out a small, red marker. Kevin watched, paralyzed, as his reflection uncapped the marker and, with a slow, steady hand, began to write on the inside of the mirror. The letters appeared backward to him, a scrawl of angry red graffiti on the glass that separated their two worlds. It wrote a single word. No. Kevin stumbled back, a raw, guttural scream tearing from his throat. This was not a projection. This was not a hallucination. This was a separate, independent entity, a prisoner in the mirror who had just found a way to communicate. He didn't remember the next few moments. He just remembered the feeling of blind, animal panic. He grabbed a heavy, wooden desk chair from his room and hurled it at the closet door with all his strength. The mirror shattered, exploding in a shower of glittering silver shards. He stood in the wreckage, gasping for air, his knuckles bleeding. The reflection was gone, broken into 1,000 tiny, fractured versions of himself. It was over. He had killed the critic. His parents burst into the room, their faces masks of shock and concern. He couldn't explain. He just collapsed into a sobbing, incoherent mess. They called his aunt, a psychiatrist who lived in nearby San Jose. She came that night. She spoke to him in a calm, soothing voice. She told him it was a psychotic break, a stress-induced hallucination, a perfectly normal reaction to an unbearable amount of pressure. She prescribed him medication, She told him he needed to rest. She told him to withdraw from the competition. He did. The scholarship, the dream of Stanford, it all evaporated. But he didn't care. He was safe. The man in the mirror was gone. The true, horrifying resolution to his story did not come until a year later. He was a student at San Jose State now, living a quieter, less ambitious life. He was on medication. He was in therapy. He was stable. The memory of the man in the mirror had faded into the realm of a terrifying, but ultimately explainable mental health crisis. One day, while helping his parents clean out their garage for a yard sale, he found it. Tucked away in a box of his old forgotten high school projects was a small, unmarked cardboard box. He opened it. Inside, nestled in a bed of foam, was a strange, high-tech looking device. It was a thin, flexible, translucent screen, about the size of a small poster, with a complex array of microchips and wires attached to its back. And there was a small, high-definition camera, no bigger than a button. He didn't understand what it was. He asked his father. His father, a quiet, unassuming man who worked as a software engineer for a small tech startup in Silicon Valley, looked at the device and his face went pale. He stammered, Where did you find this?" Kevin replied, a new, cold suspicion beginning to form in his mind. "It was in a box of my old school stuff." And then his father broke down in a flood of guilt-ridden sobs. He told him the truth. The device was a prototype. An experimental, two-way, transparent display screen his startup had been developing. It could be applied to a glass surface, like a window or a mirror, and it could project a high-definition image onto that surface, an image that could be controlled remotely in real time by a computer. The small camera was a part of the system, designed to capture the user's face and map their expressions. His father wept. It was for a new teleconferencing system, a way to make it look like the person you're talking to is in the room with you, their reflection in the glass. Kevin asked, his voice a dead, flat monotone. "What does this have to do with me?" His father whispered, "The scholarship. I knew how much pressure you were under. I saw you breaking. I just wanted to help. I thought if you could see yourself being confident, see yourself succeeding, it would help you believe in yourself." The final, horrifying piece of the puzzle clicked into place. His father had secretly installed the prototype on his closet mirror. The small camera had captured his face, his expressions, and his father, from his own computer in the home office down the hall, had been the one controlling the reflection. He had been the critic. He had been the judge. He had been the man in the mirror. His father sobbed. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted you to be stronger, more confident. I would make the reflection look a little more sure of itself. I would take away the nervous tics. I thought it was working. But then you started to unravel, and I got scared. I didn't know how to stop. The night you broke the mirror, the last thing I did, I didn't write that. I don't know how that happened." Kevin stared at his father, at this well-meaning, broken man who had, in a desperate, misguided attempt to help, become the architect of his son's psychological torture. The yawn, the shake of the head, the silent disapproval. It had all been his father, a puppeteer trying to manipulate his son's confidence. But the final act, the red marker, the impossible word "no," written from the inside of the glass, that hadn't been him. He looked back at the device, at the complex array of microchips and wires. His father's startup was a small, struggling company. They had likely outsourced the software development, the complex AI for the facial recognition and expression mapping, and a new, terrifying, and deeply modern possibility dawned on Kevin. His father had created the puppet, but on that final night, a third party, a stranger, a hacker, a ghost in the machine from a server 1,000 miles away, had taken control of the strings. The meeste male neighbors, but the base were a server 1,000 miles away, had taken control of the strings. The man then benisferig. A jinken the g-shirt of a dios, but the young and the jins. Final, damning verdict had not come from him, or from his father Dodd. It had come from an unknown, unseen, and completely anonymous third party, a digital voyeur who had found their way into the most intimate and vulnerable space in his life. For no other reason than to watch the show and to write the final, terrifying ending. He was left with a truth more horrifying than any ghost. The monster in his mirror hadn't been a demon from another dimension. Dodd had been a terrifying fusion of his father's love, his own self-doubt, and the cold, random, and utterly malevolent curiosity of a complete and total stranger. A glimpse of a future you didn't create. A figure standing in a space that should be empty. A critic that lives on the other side of the glass. These three stories, though different in their manifestation, are all born from the same fundamental, terrifying question. What happens when you can no longer trust what you see? The mirror is meant to be a constant, an objective truth in a chaotic world. It shows us who we are, but these accounts reveal a horrifying possibility, that the reflection is not a passive copy, but an active observer, a separate entity, a silent, patient doppelganger that lives just a millimeter away on the other side of a thin layer of silver and glass. The true horror in these stories is not the jump scare or the monster Dodd. It is the ultimate psychological violation, the loss of self. It is the chilling, irrefutable evidence that the person you know best, the one you are forced to face every single day, might be a complete and total stranger. It leaves us with a fear that is inescapable, because how do you run from a monster that wears your own face? If these stories have changed the way you look at your own reflection, prove you are the one in control by subscribing to Whispered Fear, leaving a like, and sharing this video. Your support helps us to keep exposing the terrifying truths that hide in plain sight. But what if the horror isn't found in your reflection, but in the oppressive, heavy silence of the world when everyone else has gone home? Click the video on your screen now as we begin our next shift. 7 true unsettling stories from people who worked the night shift alone. See you there when the lights go out.